Hi everybody, Mr. Martinez here. I wanted to take some time to create a video to give you some feedback on how to go and construct your own thesis statement for our Brave New World synthesis essay. So this won't be the only video in this series. I'll be making one for each of the components that you'll need to construct your paper, but hopefully you can use this as a resource to help you go through and develop your writing. It's going to cover how to go through the process from the beginning to the end of constructing a thesis statement to kind of begin your paper. So let's go ahead and get started together. So the first thing we want to do is we want to revisit the prompt itself, because if the prompt is the key question or the task that you're being asked to do, we want to make sure that we're aware of what those expectations are so we can meet it in our thesis and ultimately in our paper. So I've taken a truncated version of the one that I've given you on the prompt, and let's take a look at it now. So you're being asked to evaluate how Aldous Huxley's vision of a totalitarian future reflects modern society today, and the relevance of this reflection to our own freedom, future, and/or humanity. So this is kind of what I would call a two-part prompt. There's two portions of it that you're being asked to address. The first part of that prompt has to do with evaluating that comparison. So we'll kind of take a look at that right here. So this would be the first part I would designate as part one. And then this section right here is going to be part two. We'll go a little bit into more detail about what makes that up, but the first thing that I want to touch on is some of the key words in part one. So when we're evaluating Huxley's vision of a totalitarian future and how it reflects modern society today, first thing we want to start with is to evaluate and really asking ourselves what that means. Now, we go through an evaluation process when we write our own commentary, and one of the key things that we're attaching to this is you're making a judgment. In this process of when we evaluate or when we're judging, we are going through and determining a decision regarding the form or the degree of that reflection. Okay, the first part of that is Aldous Huxley's vision. Okay, another way of saying that is then our world state in Brave New World. Okay, and we're being asked to what degree does this match up to our world today. So those are the two that is going to be compared. Now, on some level, you're implying a relationship already in the prompt, which is true. I'm going to say the best way to match up into your paper is addressing to some degree how much that is. But whether everything in the world state in Aldous Huxley's Brave New World reflects our world today, or only part of it, is part of that conversation we'll touch on in a minute. And so that's part of then what you are going to go through and judge. The second part of our prompt here deals with the relevancy. This is really asking us, why does it matter? Once you determine what degree of the world state matches our own world, what you're trying to do is then present a rationale. Why is it that the audience should care about this observation and what you have there? And then in giving you this information here, freedom, future, or humanity, it's essentially our way of giving you a hint or guidance to kind of help address this question of why it should matter. So let's keep going from there, and we'll break it down a little bit more. Okay, so I want to go back to, again, that first part. I'll go ahead and identify it right here. And we're going to focus on that comparison, again, between Huxley's world and our world today. Now, we're trying to determine to what degree do some of these things match. So if we're thinking about degrees, right, it's almost as if we have a scale, okay? Is it a complete match where it's a 1-to-1, 100% of our world is a reflection of his? Is there none, no match, right, 0%? I don't think that's necessarily the key case. But internally, you're going to kind of do an evaluation or a check. To what kind of place do you think there is a match up? So let's kind of go through and I say, all right, let's say maybe 75% of our world does it. And it almost doesn't matter to what extent, you know, a quantitative number is attached to it. You're thinking more of, is it completely? Is it mostly? Is it partly? Is it only minusculely? You're kind of trying to figure out that range. And so I'm going to say most of our world is a reflection of those two things. If I'm making a judgment between kind of the world state in our world today, I think most of our world in many ways is going to touch onto that. Well, in making this evaluation or making this judgment, there's some sort of criteria that's going to get me to this point where I'm going to believe, all right, like, yes, this is then the reason why it's there. So this is the next thing that you want to start to consider. What are the elements of that criteria that build me up to this conclusion that most of the world that we are part of is a reflection of this? So maybe I'm going to say, all right, well, our ways of dealing with genetic manipulation are part of that conversation in the ways in which we've gone through and we mapped the human genome and we're starting the cloning process. Maybe I'm going to touch on the way in which we find conditioning in the world today, that the way in which advertising, the way in which social media is going through and trying to essentially get us to buy products and consume goods, that we see a reflection of that. And so maybe it's not just the conditioning that I'm talking about, but also the consumerism that I see. And so then the way in which we find mass production in the world state to continually buy goods, to continually consume, to continually be entertained and distracted is also what we see here. And so then that last part, maybe I'm going to also touch in to distraction or a pleasure entertainment culture as well. So these kind of four things are some of the criteria of what I'm using to create a judgment where I'm making the conclusion or the claim that most of our world is a reflection of then his world state. And so this kind of gives me a direction for some of that criteria to be able to then build out a larger argument as a whole. This is generally what you would typically start to think of, okay, as what are some of the elements of the listing statements, and it can be presented in that form, but I'm going to show you a couple alternatives with that as well. So let's keep moving forward. Okay, the second thing we're going to need to touch on is then part two. And the thing that you've noticed about last slide and this slide is really we're brainstorming out and writing down notes. You know, one of the difficult things to do is when you're trying to create a nuanced, definitive position, is trying to keep it all in your head. Okay, research basically talks about the way in which, you know, as humans, there is a limited amount of what we can keep in our heads. We call this cognitive load. To decrease that cognitive load helps you basically focus on your tasks. So what's my point? Write down your notes. Once you have all your notes down, then it's easier for you to be able to go through and make those comparisons. So if I remember from earlier, that relevance is really asking me why it matters. Why does it matter that our world mostly is a reflection? What I'm going to start looking at is, okay, how does then the fact that our world matches the world state start addressing concerns dealing with our future or our freedom or our humanity or a combination of all of those together? So when we talk about future, freedom, and humanity, those are larger abstract ideas. And an abstract idea is, again, something that is just not a definitive one-to-one concrete definition. So when I talk about, you know, what makes us human or our humanity, maybe that is our ability to be able to empathize or our ability to have free will and think for ourselves. And that free will maybe is part of also that freedom as well. So I kind of have both of these areas. You know, maybe it is a part of having your own individual identity. And maybe that's also part of that freedom. That's a part of those processes. So what you're essentially doing is you're brainstorming out what are the elements that are a part of either your humanity, your freedom, your future that you see threatened within Huxley's novel. And then in knowing that, okay, I've made a conclusion that most of what is Huxley's novel is reflecting our world, what may be a threat to our world today. So you're really going to want to take the time to brainstorm out this information because, again, this is going to really help you narrow your argument when you go a little bit further. So what we're now going to start to do is take the notes that we have gathered from, you know, analyzing the first part of this prompt, analyzing the second part of this prompt, and put this information together into one place. Now, I only have it you know, on my other screens, but I'm going to give us a template to be able to work off of from here. Now I'm being asked to make a comparison between the two societies. So here we have both of them, again, our world and Huxley's world state. And I know the judgment was that it was mostly a reflection of that. And I also need to ask why it's concerning. Okay, if it's a satire, certainly it's going to be a threat to our world. So what I start doing is taking the notes that I generated and plugging them in. So today's society has, in this case, my decision was mostly become a reflection of Huxley's world state through, okay, and now I go back to kind of the criteria that I used to make that judgment. I'm going to say our misuse of science to cover my genetics and our devotion to entertainment to cover conditioning, consumerism, and pleasure society. And now I'm going to go into then why it matters. What is it threatening? Well, if I'm saying today's society has mostly become a reflection of Huxley's world state through our misuse of science and our devotion to entertainment, it is then for threatening our ability to empathize. So that was part of what I brainstormed earlier. And the second part, our free will. Okay, so it now is threatening our ability to empathize. And if I wanted to then go through and refine it a little bit more, then it's threatening not only our ability to empathize and our free will, but I'm going to then take that one step forward and say which is fundamental to our humanity. And now I have my argument. And then from there, what I'll do is I'll take my thesis and use that to start building out how I'm going to structure my essay and go through and construct my outline from there. So we'll follow up with what those next steps look like in the next video. Hope this was helpful. Please leave me some feedback and let me know if this was useful or not, or what I can do to best support you along the way. Good luck, and I'll be seeing you in the classroom.